I now am really excited to kick off all the panel discussions for today. I'm very excited to learn from each of our distinguished panelists and
Apurva, there is a question for Anshu, if Anshu would like to address that. Just one question is there.
Yeah.
Anshu has already answered it.
I put the answer in the chat, CB.
It's fine then. Perfect. You can move to the panel discussion.
All right, great, thanks. There will be many interesting questions that will be asked, and I'm sure excellent inputs provided by our panelists. To moderate our first panel, we have Mr. Subhashish Dey, who is the Director of Climate Policy at Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation. Subhashish is a climate change and energy efficiency expert with 2 decades of experience in advising government, multilateral organizations, and businesses across the globe on projects related to energy efficiency, climate change mitigation, and adaptation in sectors such as industry, transport, water, and buildings. Welcome, Subhashish, and I hand this over to you.
Thank you, Apurva. I hope I am audible.
Yes.
Thank you. So the topic of today's first panel discussion is revitalizing the implementation of India Cooling Action Plan. Before I introduce the panel, I would like to share a few of my thoughts and help maybe set the context. So in March 2019, India launched its India Cooling Action Plan, and it was launched by the then Minister, Dr. Harshavardhan. And I was fortunate to be part of that launch program. During the same time, India had taken another proactive action in hosting the Global Cooling Prize, where Ministry of Environment, Bureau of Energy Efficiency, and Department of Science and Technologies were different government bodies who have actually helped that program to develop. And then we had more than hundreds of new technologies being shared from global manufacturers, and then we had ended up selecting one of the technologies coming from China. Now, though we have started with a big bang, I would say, because India happens to be the first country to launch the draft cooling action plan, and definitely one of the first to or rather the first to launch a comprehensive cooling action plan. The other country was Rwanda, but their cooling action plan was not comprehensive. Even the subsequent cooling action plans which were developed by other countries had taken a lot of learning from what India had proposed. 2 years have passed since then, and then we have heard from Mr. Chandrabhushan as well as Mr. Aditya Narayan about different activities which has happened or not happened. I'm not going to get into that in detail, but the point remains that we cannot really afford to lose our first movers advantage. We have launched the plan. It is a very comprehensive plan. There can be more actionable points integrated like the way China have developed. And I know for sure that China's plan is developed keeping India's plan as a standard. China got support from Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program, and they actually reviewed Indian plan to develop their own. I can tell you that with confidence. Now, why for India is so critical? A lot of points had been already shared by Chandrabhushan. I'm not going to get into those, but I'll just throw you a few numbers. Severe heat events, and this is coming from a recent report from Lancet. They call it, and they have called out the number of working hours which different countries have lost in 2019 because of severe heat events. It's around 302 billion hours have been lost globally. Out of that, 118 billion hours have been lost in India. In terms of health issues, we have also seen, and again, it comes from the same Lancet report. It tells us that globally there are around 300,000 deaths happened in 2018, and this is basically the people who are above the age of 65 because of severe heat event, and 10% of those deaths came from India. The largest number of deaths came from China, but we were not a distant second. In terms of the loss to GDP, again, there has been assessment done by various studies, and what it indicates by 2030, the loss to GDP because of severe heat events is going to be something around 5% for cases like most of the countries in South Asia. So these are points which we need to look into when we take the implementation of ICAP more seriously. I know for sure there are a number of activities which are happening in different government departments, be it the Environment Ministry or Bureau of Energy Efficiency or Department of Science and Technologies, and even other ministries like the housing ministries and all, when they are coming up with projects at both at the national and as well as subnational level. But more, I believe, is still need to be done to the extent that it becomes visible to the citizens of the country, and they would start understanding and appreciating the importance of cooling in their life, or rather efficient cooling in their life. At the same time, we do acknowledge that COVID-19 pandemic has diverted government's attention and priorities. But however, there were a lot of areas in which, for example, in Atmanirbhar Bharat package, where cooling or efficient cooling could be integrated. There were packages on housing, there was packaging on cold chain sector. I believe there still remains a lot of opportunity for everybody in us, and definitely not all onus lies with the government departments and ministries. I would say the onus lies with everybody of us. How do we integrate those best practices in areas in which government has already provided the budget for? Now, with that thought, I would like to introduce our esteemed panel. And I will start with Ms. Sumedha Malviya, a good friend of mine. She is a manager at WRI India's energy program, and she manages the program's initiative on energy in mostly in building and cities. She had been instrumental also to come up with WRI's report on determining the pathways to zero carbon buildings. The next speaker in the panel is again a good friend of mine, Mr. Abhishek Kaushik. He's an associate fellow and area convener with the Art Science and Climate Change Division at TEDI. He's a multidisciplinary researcher working in international and national climate policies. And the third speaker is Mr. Madhusudhan Rapole. He's the managing director of Urja Engineering Services. His focus is on innovation in renewable energy, energy efficiency, and decarbonization technology. Now, the way we would like to structure this panel discussion is that I would request each of the panel members to make the initial remark, and please try to wrap up your initial remark in 5 minutes, and thereafter we'll get into a more open house discussion among the panelists and the moderator, and then the last 10 minutes would be for a open discussion where we'll take questions from the audience. And now I would request Sumedha to share her thoughts.
Thanks, Shubhashish, and congratulations to for the launch of these reports. I did get a chance to go through them before the panel, and I must say that a lot of the understanding that is presented in these reports confirms our views as well. Working on the ground with cities, with state governments, I think CB in the beginning compelling, and I mean, and Anshu also said the same thing, that a very persuasive argument for national action on cooling. But I think we need the same kind of compelling argument for states which are not even aware of the existence of this document. And the long work road ahead of us in terms of making sure that states understand ICAP. It matches what their priorities are, what their needs and aspirations are, because I think as with the federal nature that we do have the top down tendency to sort of impose these kinds of plans and programs on the states, but the bottom up process of deliberation has to be strengthened in parallel. And I hope when we talk about revitalization of the ICAP, we are able to look at it from a fresh perspective of what the state's demands are, what the states really need, and we have to meet them where they actually are. And it could be some states prioritizing some other development objective, they are not prioritizing climate per se. So how do we draw those linkages, and what kind of data and evidence can we collect as the community present here to present those arguments to states? Maybe start look at how the plan can be implemented in those states which are slightly higher in potential in terms of the climate targets that we're looking at, and then move on to other states. There are different approaches to do this. I wouldn't take too much time. I would definitely like to hear other panelists come back later with my reflections again. Thanks.
Thank you, Sumedha. How about you, Abhishek?
Thank you, Subhashish. And let me also take this opportunity to thank the organizers, iForest and Shakti, for inviting Terry to be a part of this discussion. So I'll start with, saying that, yes, we have seen that, that the ICAP was formulated and in fact launched in the year 2019. And then now we are in 2020. But one important thing to remember is, again, because as we are talking about implementation, now most of this implementation actually, faces some sort of hindrance because of the pandemic related issues. And we have seen that, all of us have seen that. So through this maybe opportunity, I would like to share, what Terry has done maybe after the launch of ICAP. So later in the year 2019, Terry, along with its partner AEEE and CEW, actually conceptualized a civil society initiative, which we named as Sheetal, which is actually on Alliance for Sustainable Habitat, Energy Efficiency and Thermal Comfort for All. This initiative is a civil society initiative, which is supported by SIF. And the idea behind having this initiative is to facilitate the implementation of ICAP. And as part of the initiative, we thought of looking at a range of sectors and range of issues which are important for facilitating this implementation. So we looked at space cooling, energy performance standards, R&D, transport, among other sort of sectors and issue. Now I think over the more than a year now with this initiative, the consortium has facilitated a number of interactions and discussions, basically to analyze and inform aspects related to social resilient cooling. And we also work with looking at different stakeholders and to address the challenge of refrigerant as well as non-refrigerant technologies across residential and commercial segments. As part of this work, though Terry along with its partner also helping and working with the states, and particularly I would like to mention Karnataka and Madhya Pradesh, where Terry is working very closely towards implementation of ECBC codes. Our partner AEEE is again working on the implementation of EcoNivas Samhita, and they are also extending their work towards evaporative cooling, fan tapping, and also looking at different sort of issues. Similarly, as part of the consortium, CEW is assessing mechanisms related to R&D, as well as building the capacity and also tapping the service sector to mainstream the opportunities with the existing framework. So I think in the last maybe over a year now, we have achieved much progress, and I would say that with these interactions with some of the work which we have done as part of Sheetal project forms the basis for not just identifying some of these low GWP technologies, but also to building some sort of a capacity of different stakeholders on the adoption of low GWP refrigerants and other issues. So having said that, I think I know that we just started this, and because of pandemic, we still have gained lot of more progress, and still I think there is a lot more to do. So I'm sure through this initiative, which is again led by some of the leading think tanks in India, I'm sure we would be able to continue to do so and help policymakers, especially Ozone Cell, towards their vision of implementing ICAP. So I'll stop here. Maybe I'll be happy to share more details about this initiative. Thank you, Subhashish.
Thank you, Abhishek. Over to you, Mr. Madhusudan.
Sure. Thank you, Subhashish, and thanks to iForest and Shakti Foundation for having me on panel. Good afternoon, everyone. My experience is primarily in design, implementation, operation of not-in-kind technologies like radiant cooling, structure cooling, geothermal and solar cooling. So I plan to bring perspective of a practitioner to complement the ideas that Sumedha and Abhishek bring to the table. They bring, of course, the policy and the research expertise. So though we are viewing the problem from our different perspectives, I hope we'll be able to synthesize something meaningful, as we are all interested in addressing the same, big elephant in the room, the decarbonization of building sector. So I do believe that the formulation of India Cooling Action Plan has been a seminal policy direction that definitely aims to bring together, all the stakeholders and galvanize them into action. As everybody has been saying, the COVID-19 must have put some brakes, but I'm sure we all will, all the efforts will pick pace now. I'm not privy to the efforts to achieve the short-term goals, by that the policy shows by exploring synergies with other government schemes and programs, like even a PM Awas Yojana or a mission on sustainable habitats. But what I want to do to kickstart a debate is to bring to fore an aspect that I believe can help in achieving some of these short-term and medium-term goals of this action plan. So what I've seen is that residential sector is expected to have a majority contribution towards increase in the cooling demand. Now, what I'm proposing is, why not aggregate this demand and provide cooling using chilled water that can help us achieve multiple goals, right? And this can be mandated for, just like we are mandating ECBC for a certain capacity, above a certain capacity in commercial buildings. The same can be done for residential buildings or communities having, say, maybe 1 million square foot and above. This can probably help us a lot. I mean, all of us know the advantage of diversity that can be taken if we can aggregate that and put systems at one place. We can look at least 50% reduction in the capacity. A reduction in capacity will help us, reduce the usage of refrigerant directly, and to help us achieve goals of the Kigali Agreement, connected load and size of DG, all these reduce. So definitely air-cooled, the chillers are more energy efficient than the unitary ACs that all our residential buildings run on. Okay. And the opportunities that come out of it, like peak shaving using thermal storage, or maybe even free cooling in certain seasons, or using solar energy that is generated during the day to store cooling. These are all opportunities that come up. And tomorrow, if we have to move to natural refrigerants, let's say ammonia, CO2, whatever. The change needs to be done at one place. So if the policy, if we can start steering this market towards higher cooling efficiencies, that would, I believe, provide enough opportunities for future enhancements. This could also throw up new business models, right, where specialized companies can operate these assets or maybe invest in it. We have seen this happening in solar photovoltaic. We are seeing that now happening in electric vehicles. So if such aggregated models can maybe further given status of, say, a cooling utility, then probably faster results can be achieved by incentivizing such businesses to invest in higher efficiencies, because they understand the technology as well as the business model. Today, we are depending on the builders or developers to understand these technologies and take decisions related to that, right? But if specialized agencies emerge out of this, then they can probably provide a shorter path to achieve our goals. EESL is a very good example of how demand aggregation can help us achieve goals. So what I'm proposing is maybe a little scaled down version of district cooling, which again is part of India Cooling Action Plan to achieve both short-term and long-term goals. So with those opening remarks, I'll rest and then hope to pick up further during the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Madhusudhan. So I will start with a few questions of my own. Now, both Sumedha and Abhishek has actually touched upon the very critical point, which is the action, how states as well as cities would contribute in implementation of ICAP. Now, from my understanding, and again, I may stand corrected, what I have seen is that the actions which has happened both at the city or the state level has been more isolated and sporadic. And most of the actions are related to either setting up energy conservation building code, ECBC cells, and the support which had been provided to different agencies for implementation or integration of Econivas Samhita. However, the system level synthesis is missing in most of the states. That's again my understanding. So if the understanding is also is correct, or you have the similar kind of views, and the question mostly is towards Sumedha and Abhishek, but Madhusudhanji, you can also pitch in. So how do you recommend or propose that the system level integration of, say, cooling agenda in the developmental priorities of cities or states can be taken forward? Over to you.
Maybe Sumedha, would you like to go first?
I can go after you also, Abhishek. Why don't you go ahead?
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, Subhashish. I think it's a very important question to look at, how we can look at this integration. Now, as you know, most of us who are in this discussion are aware that, the formulation of any policy, and sort of, conceptualization happen at the center level. But, its implementation and its further sort of, action is largely, looks after, let's say, by states and local governments. Now, having said that, yes, I clearly see that states and local governments are very instrumental in the implementation of ICAP, but we also need to see how we can, align existing efforts which are made by states, looking at, implementation of other policies or, let's say, other schemes at place. Now, the reason why I've actually picked the example of ECBC, and that is where we can learn from, is that, so we have ECBC and then we have these state designated agencies who are responsible for, looking at the implementation. So can we look at this integration where, ICAP related issues and ICAP related, let's say, targets can also be, aligned with, let's say, something at the state level. So so that, we can see, because cooling is an issue which is cross-sectoral in a nature. So we can't really say that, okay, this is a responsibility, let's say, for a department or let's say for an agency. But, you need to cater to different, let's say, set of stakeholders and different set of sectors in place. So how best we can, integrate efforts which are existing in nature with the implementation of ICAP is a key consideration to look at. Now, of course, we can see, okay, when it comes to, let's say, some sort of institutional framework in place to see the implementation of ICAP at the state level. Yes, there is of course, some sort of discussion or some sort of, I think maybe some sort of discussion is needed at the state level. But I think maybe to begin with, let's say, SDAs, and to begin with some of the state agencies who are already looking at different policies, can be a good starting point. So maybe I'll stop here, and maybe I'll be happy to respond to further questions.
Sure. Thank you, Abhishek. And for Sumedha, from taking cues from Abhishek, I will have a more pointed question for you. Now, ECBC had been there for more than a decade now, and we all know that the implementation of ECBC had been super slow in all realistic terms. So are we also looking at a similar kind of trajectory for ICAP implementation, or a different methodology, or a way forward is required?
Thanks, Shubhashish, and I hope not I hope we are not looking at experience that we have been having with ECBC. Abhishek mentioned stakeholders which have been somewhat instrumental institutionally to operationalize ECBC. So from our perspective, the role of the SDA. So SDAs were, brought up by Abhishek, and what we have found is that the relationship of the SDAs with local governments is completely missing. They do not have any platforms for talking to each other, or even if there are ECBC cells which are housed within the SDAs, they play a very specific role as far as implementation of the checklist of ECBC action plan is concerned. So each state is supposed to implement it at the local level, but we don't see the same kind of interactions happening between the local government, the municipal officials, and with the SDAs on a regular basis. So that chain of communication is definitely not very strong. Having said that, I think the important difference that we need to make, as as far as ICAP is concerned, is definitely we have to talk to the states. I feel we are, we have talked about this before. I mean, when we were talking about the implementation of ECBC, there was and the typical example that is given is from Telangana, and there also the success of implementation is completely rested on how the state government took ownership and drove the whole process down to the local scale. If that at all is a success story, and that is something that we would like to learn from, then what are those lessons really? I think as a community, we need to look at those look at those experiences very carefully. And building consensus, I feel, will naturally come once we actually have the data and evidence to say that, so you stand to benefit implementation in so and so way. And let's is not a sector. It's something which has been created definitely to sort of streamline the implementation of our climate commitments climate commitments, which will come to a large extent from cooling. So if cooling is not a sector at the state level, what is? If it's buildings, if it's transport, then where are we building those linkages? Where are we introducing cooling in those sectors? So I would like for us to not just focus on space cooling, but also look at other aspects to other sectors, because for certain states, certain sectors might matter more, depending upon what capacities they have, what infrastructure they have in place, what institutional arrangements they already have, and which are stronger. And in some states, some institutions might be more strong than the others. So in some state, if it's the agricultural department which is strong, in the other state, it might be the housing department, or it might be the transport department. And how do you sort of make sure that, we are not cutter approach that whatever we have for one state will work across different states. And there I feel we have a lot of work to do as a community. We would need to look at, where the different states are coming from, what their priorities are, where they are, kind of a mapping to find the kind of allies we are expecting at the state level. And the last point I want to make is that there is a significant lesson to be learned in the process of peer-to-peer comparisons and sort of competition that can be created. Sometimes these things actually work. I mean, in sort of stimulating the direction in the discourse of getting more states to respond to the recommendations. But at the same time, if we don't localize and if we don't bring the states on board fairly quickly, this will continue to remain a top-down thing. Thanks. I'll stop.
Thank you, Sumedha. I'm not going to delve too much into this issue anymore because it's a long-standing issue and it's a systemic level challenge. And as we all understand that it's a complex challenge. My next question would be for Madhusudan ji, and since he had spoken about how business can contribute. So taking from taking ahead from your initial comments, I would like to know more how innovators and small business can help implementation of ICAP. I understood the points which you have talked about related to district cooling, but beyond district cooling, there are other technologies like say not-in-kind technologies and others where there can be a low energy cooling system where I believe there is a lot of areas of innovation and where a small business can also provide a lot of support. So over to you, Madhusudan ji.
Thank you. So I'll tie this a little bit to the aspirational and the social aspect of cooling that is addressed in ICAP, where these not-in-kind technologies or low energy technologies can play a big role. What we see today is air conditioning or cooling primarily concentrated in certain kind of buildings, and you see that other kind of building. I'll take example. Let's say we talk about airports. Airports are air conditioned, but railway stations and bus stations, they're not. I mean, there's no cooling at all, right? So, and there can be multiple such examples like government hospitals and the courts and various kind of public infrastructure where we don't provide any comfort, right? So these not-in-kind technologies, at least some of them, like structure cooling or evaporative cooling, these can provide cooling where air conditioning cannot be provided, either because of the nature of usage of building. Let's say you take a big, since many of you from Delhi, maybe ISBT, right? It's a large bus terminal, gets very hot and very uncomfortable for passengers who travel by bus. But we don't make an effort even to understand what are the technologies available or how can we address this. And there are many such examples for us where we need to provide equitable cooling in structures which cannot afford air conditioning. So I believe that's those kind of structure can be ideal for piloting these not-in-kind technologies and scale them up.
Thank you. Now, on the same thought process, and we know that not-in-kind technologies will have an impact on both the buildings which are owned by affluent classes, as well as the buildings which are owned by not so affluent people, people living in villages, and then the services which are required. So I'm keeping the affluent class apart because they have other ways and means also to provide comfort conditions. But say for example, a state is going to come up with a new ISBT, or a railway station. Now, currently there is no mechanism even for the citizens who are going to receive those services to voice their opinion that this is the kind of comfort condition which is required in a bus station. It's always taken for granted that the people who are traveling in a state-owned bus service are someone who has to travel in a very poor, uncomfortable condition, It's a given. So how do we create that kind of atmosphere or a demand coming from, or the voice coming from the citizens, or how do we even start nudging the citizens that they start demanding that these are something which is required for every citizen in the country? People who can afford, say, mechanical cooling, at the same time, people who are not in a position to afford mechanical cooling. So it's an open question for the panel. So whoever would like to respond, please.
I'll go ahead if I'll continue.
Please,
if others
please.
don't mind, right? So yeah, I call this a social divide of cool haves and hot have-nots, right? It's a problem. It needs to be addressed. But my thought on this is from more than citizen activism. These decisions are taken by a very small group of people who are in the CPWD or state PWDs, right? There is an entire engineering branch which takes actually decisions on what kind of technologies have cooling technologies that are to be chosen, implemented for all of our public infrastructure, right? So if in some ways, and this comes down to what are the interministerial synergies that can be explored. Today, ICAP is MOFCC's baby, but how do you co-opt Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, under which CPWD comes, to share that vision? Because they are the ones who are building this infrastructure and taking decisions that only fans have to be there, and that too, not so energy efficient fans in these bus terminals or railway stations. Okay, so my thought would be to there's a lot of effort. I heard one of the speakers say a lot of training has happened for technicians. So at a ground level, that is happening. But I think one very crucial training and skill upgradation that needs to happen is of the engineers, the AEs, the senior superintendent engineer, the chief engineers, who should feel comfortable with these, taking decisions on these technologies, and take decision incorporating these in our public structure, public infrastructure with confidence. That's my thought. Others can chime in.
Thank you, Madhusudhan ji. Abhishek.
Yeah, thanks, Subhashish. So if you allow me, Subhashish, let me share a very interesting piece of work which we have done last year as part of our cooling research. So we have actually conducted a perception survey where we actually reached out to consumers, policymakers, industry players, and service personals. And though that sample size was very large, and we actually try to identify, okay, what sort of challenges or what sort of opportunities do we have, let's say, when we talk about energy efficient ACs, or what is it that policymakers wanted to see, how we can look at, let's say, some of the concerns by the manufacturers related to cost, policy directions. So some of the key findings were like as follows. So the very first thing is that, of course, there is a clear sort of demand among the consumers, and they tend to buy energy efficient air conditioners. So that was our key sort of finding. And I think now, at least, especially in the metro cities, every consumer always look for, let's say, ratings and how efficient that AC is. So that sort of intent and that sort of knowledge is there with the buyers. Now the second finding is around what we heard from the policymakers, that they seek better awareness and cooperation across the value chain. Now, having said that, I think what we sort of analyze that, of course, there is an integrated long-term vision, especially on cooling encompassing others, actually needed on optimization of cooling demand, integration of energy efficiency and refrigerant transition efforts. So there is a clear need of R to have an integrated long-term vision. So that is something which, we heard from, let's say, policymakers who have shared their thoughts with us. Now, on the manufacturer side, this is again very interesting. What they have to say that, the cost impact of the transitioning to environment-friendly refrigerants must be understood better. What it means that, that of course they need some sort of, cost policy directions and training sort of concerns, and that is something which they've shared. But of course, there should be some sort of financial aid which is provided to the consumers. That is something which manufacturers sort of, have to say. Now, the final finding was with the servicing sector. And what we actually analyzed and what we found that, the servicing workforce is still driven significantly by informal training. So the short point, what I'm trying to say is, of course, there is a clear need from the buyer. There is a clear, sort of understanding among the service technicians. Of course, there is much more to do in terms of, building their skills, providing them formal trainings and things like that. And of course, from the policy perspective, there is a clear sort of, expectation that, the buyers and the sellers of this value chain needs to, work together towards, not just looking at the issue related to energy efficiency in ACs, but also, the larger issue of implementing ICAP. So maybe, just to relate to your point, I think some sort of these studies, I think are play a very important role just to understand. And like, I think Sumedha also mentioned during her intervention that, there is of course a need for us as a civil society, as think tanks, to, work closely with the policymakers so that at least this knowledge gap, or at least this gap of, providing like technical know-how of implementation can be bridged. So, maybe I'll stop here and would be happy to take more questions.
Thank you. So,
just like
Sumedha,
to make
please.
a quick point there. So I'm going back to your question, Shubhashish, on making this inclusive and, ensuring how we can make access to cooling equitable. I think as a community, and also, the experience that we have had working with some of these grassroots organizations, and this is speaking from the experience that we have, the work that we are doing currently in Bangalore with the grassroots NGO called TIDE, the Vidyut Rakshaka initiative, under which we basically initially, in the initial stages of the program, we had trained local youths, we call them VR stewards, to collect information on electricity consumption, the way people use appliances from within their neighborhoods and within their localities. These people, the VR stewards that I'm talking about, were belonging to the slightly lower income. Target groups were also smaller households, people with very little usage on electrical appliances. But the surprising findings were that they were as keen to cut down energy bills as they were in, being a part of VR itself, and which was surprising to us, because we would imagine that their bills are anyway small. So where do they actually find the opportunities to cut down further, given that they own very little? But it's also a reflection on how people aspire, right? Like the kinds of aspirations that people have, and making sure that those aspirations are informed. They are informed by the choices that we are making, within the middle income, higher income bracket. And I feel that there is a role for citizen activism there. There is a role for building civil society grassroots level. That work has to continue, because they are the connect with the communities which do not have a voice in these discussions, and they will not be participating in perception surveys either. They will be the ones repercussions of the kinds of decisions we make at the state level or at the city level. So how do we ensure that the planning that we do at the local level includes them in the process? And for that, we need certain methods and tools, but not to make them too complex and too research oriented, but at the same time, trying to get the right data, right information to make sure that we are meeting these unmet requirements and unmet demand. There's a lot of good research happening, for example, in Bombay with respect to slum housing, the slum rehabilitation house,
Yeah.
looking at thermal comfort there. So, and those lessons have been scaled up and been brought into the general housing policy of the Maharashtra government. So there are examples that we could look at, but the enablement and empowerment of civil society and NGOs at the grassroots level is extremely important in this.
Thank you, all of you, for the wonderful point made. I'll leave this point with a positive note. Many of you might be knowing that Indian Railway Station Development Corporation, that is IRSDC, is in the process of developing a set of new building development code, or rather area development code, for monetization and redevelopment of Indian railway stations. And they have in those code, thermal comfort is not a voluntary but a mandatory requirement. So that I believe in years to come, when we go to a railway station, we will not feel as uncomfortable as we feel now. Now we have spoken about cities, we have spoken about states, we have talked about citizens' involvement. Now coming back to the national level, I know many of you would be aware that there was certain discussions going around regarding whether cooling should be part of India's nationally determined contribution. That's the NDC goal. I know that India may or may not be updating their NDC soon, but there will be a global stock taking, after which every country has to submit their new NDC. So do you find merit in integrating the recommendations of ICAP or ICAP's aspiration, not the recommendations, but the aspirations in India's NDC going forward? If yes, then why? And if no, then also why?
I can start this time, and
Please.
probably Abhishek and Madhusudan can pitch in. I feel that NDCs are response to the world to solve a global problem, and to ensure that we have this way of operationalizing NDCs at the state level. We cannot completely over rely on the role of NDC action. Because climate may not be the unifying factor for cities and states. It is unfortunate, but that's how it has been. And while the way we have designed, for example, and tried to implement these state action plans on climate change, they are a classic how something which was decided at the top level as a contribution, as a global commitment of India towards climate change, and the states were supposed to rally behind it. It didn't really result in the kind of implementation that we were looking for, because the states were not on board with the SAPCC. So there are other unifying factors in which are going to be which could eventually help us with achieving NDC commitments, and finding those factors at the state level, whether it's development, whether it's SDG goals, whether it's better quality of life for the people. I think we would have to link them to those factors, because the fact is that the states and cities are used to thinking what has happened for 30 to 40 years, but the scale of the problem that we are dealing with right now, and the actions that we need to take, need to happen in the next 10 to 15 years. And so if we become better at communicating this urgency and finding that unifying factor across different states and cities, we may find better progress versus using the NDC as a way to synergize action. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Sumedha. Any other thoughts from Abhishek or Madhusudan ji?
Maybe I can talk very briefly on this point, Subhashish, and building on to what Sumedha already said. Of course, we need to understand that NDCs have been, formed and announced and submitted, looking at, let's say, our contribution to the global problem of which is around global warming and limiting the and in line with the Paris Agreement. So and the way NDCs were were thought through by the government of India, those were more on the targets which we are seeing are like economic wide targets, and we don't have any specific target for any sector. So let's say, what are we talking here then? Are we saying that, okay, how cooling as a cross sectoral issue can help in, let's say, achieving our emission intensity reduction target? So somewhere we need to maybe re-see or refocus on the narrative which we are trying to build, basically just to see what sort of linkages are we looking at while looking at this integration between ICAP and NDCs. So now the point what I'm trying to say, for instance, if we are saying, okay, how there is a need to see how, let's say, cooling as a cross-sectoral issue is contributing to achieving your emission intensity reduction target. So if we are doing that assessment, then of course, we need to understand that if I talk about national greenhouse gas inventory, which India through its third biennial update report submitted, the share of, and here I'm talking about and quoting the numbers from our third BUR, if we look at the key categories of the total emissions in the year 2016, if I'm not wrong, the share of production of production of halocarbons and sulfur hexafluoride HFC is just 0.68% in your total sort of greenhouse gas inventory. And this is the number which I'm quoting from our third biennial update report. So we need to see, of course, there is a clear need to see synergies between how, let's say, implementation of ICAP can help achieving some of our NDC targets. But we need to keep in mind that the focus and the way these two were structured are sort of very different in nature. Like Sumedha said, I think there the focus is more to show our commitments and the targets, or let's say the commitments we have made as to the international, the global problem. But ICAP is very much focused on looking at how we can actually take some targets or some actions at the national level to look at this problem of cooling, or I will not call it a problem, but to look at this cross-sectoral issue of looking at energy efficient ways of making this cooling more efficient. So the short point is, of course, there is a need, and there is a need to see the synchronization, but I think we need to maybe reshape our narrative.
Thank you, Abhishek. So we have a couple of questions from the audience, and I'll take them one by one. The first question is, someone is asking, his or her name is not available here. What are government initiatives to make common man aware of ICAP or its goal? Is social media or even telemedia being used to educate, persuade consumers to demand green refrigerant, not in kind technologies from companies? Maybe a short answer, because we know that we have discussed this briefly before. From any of the panelists?
I don't think there are any, except the campaign that we've been seeing. The BE is running on the standards and labeling program and across different energy efficiency initiatives. But if we say per se on the ICAP, what has been the promotion? I mean, personally, I'm not aware of any of those, kinds of initiatives to reach out to the common people. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The next question. Yeah, please.
And maybe if I can respond, this is again related to the civil society initiative, which I was talking about, Subhashish, at the beginning. So we actually trying to reach out to, users and the consumers through, this Sheetal initiative. And the intent is very much to, raise awareness, not just among consumers, but also among, manufacturers and the policymakers. So yes, efforts are there. It's not that, there are no efforts. Efforts are there. Of course, we need to possibly, focus more on this area.
Thank you. The next question is from Vinuta Gopal. The question is as follows. Can the panelists also comment on the aspects of public health as an important driver for the ICAP?
I'll take that, if that's okay. I personally have not seen that aspect of it in ICAP, where it seems to focus mostly on energy efficiency and thermal aspect of the comfort or cooling. The health aspect, which has been magnified now post COVID, unfortunately, has is not something that I see in ICAP. But having said that, all what we are seeing on the ground now is when you go to implement any energy efficient technology, the health, I mean, there's more stress on how we are managing fresh air, how there is either sterilization or purification of air. Even if ICAP doesn't specifically address that, um, on the ground, I think it'll be a demand that is coming from the market, and you will see more and more buildings paying attention to this aspect, along with the thermal comfort. Earlier, only thermal comfort with energy efficiency was the mantra, but now the health aspect, especially with the quality of air that we breathe indoors, also is something that customers have put on the radar now.
Thank you. The next question is from Purnima Kumar, and it's a very interesting question. The question is, do you think the absence of equitable thermal comfort / cooling in SDGs might affect the way sustainable cooling is considered in Indian policymaking? This would be the penultimate question, and there would be another question after that, and then we will close today's session as we are coming near to the 50-minute slot. Over to you.
I can quickly respond. I think the SDGs are, fairly comprehensive in the way they, strive towards, poverty reduction and, improving the overall quality of life for people. So, as far as absence of a specific goal or target is concerned on equitable or thermal comfort, I don't think we need to create a separate target, but yes, I mean, the linkages that are there with existing SDGs, whether it's SDG 7 or SDG 12, I think those we need to draw more strongly and have the right indicators to track those linkages. And that's where I think we would need to work on in the future as well.
Thank you, Sumedha. The last question is from Mr. Gokul Nandan. And the question is as follows. Do you think cooling action can be implemented in rural India? What kind of challenges we have in this regard?
I'll take that.
Yes.
Yes, at some point it will have to percolate in rural India. But I think the current challenge that the policymakers as well as the market players are, or even the market players are dealing with is in the urban areas where there are multiple factors that, magnify the problem that we are facing. One of them being urban heat island effect. So once I think all these, I mean, I've seen cooling markets have a lot of inertia. They take time, unlike, let's say, other markets which have seen rapid transformation, like, let's say, mobility, right? Traditionally, cooling markets have been, have very high inertia. So even a new technology takes at least a decade, if not more, to be adopted at a mass scale. So I think the way I visualize this is, or most of these technologies will be tested, tried, scaled up in urban settings, and then those, once they are tried and tested and accepted, will percolate down to rural India. But rural India has a higher opportunity or a better opportunity in using passive means more effectively than the urban counterparts. They sometimes are constrained by what is available to them at the site. So I would say a greater opportunity in the passive side on the rural India. That's my thought.
Thank you. And with this, I would like to conclude today's first panel discussion. And thank you, and I would like to thank the panelists for sharing their wisdom and knowledge. And we were really fortunate to have such a great panel of researchers as well as implementers. So thank you for your time and energy which you have brought into the panel discussion. And over to you, Aparupa.
Thanks, Shubhashish. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Subhashish. Thank you, Abhishek, Sumedha, and Madhusudan.